Last summer, I paid $148 for a bone-in ribeye at a steakhouse in downtown Chicago. 3-week wait for a table. A man at the door who takes your coat. My wife took one bite, set her fork down, and told me the steak I grew up eating in the mountains, the one my grandmother cooked on a wood stove with nothing but a cast iron skillet and a tin of lard, was better. She wasn't being nice. She meant it. And she's not wrong, because where I come from, in the hollows of Appalachia, nobody ever owned a grill. We cooked everything the way it had been cooked for 200 years, over a wood fire, in iron, with patience nobody has anymore. Here's what I'm telling you, and I want you to hold me to it. By the end of this video, you will know how to cook a steak in your own kitchen that beats anything a restaurant in this country can put in front of you. Not close, better. On a cut of meat that costs a fraction of what they charge, using a pan you already own. 20 steps. Every one of them takes something away from a room that charges you $148 for a plate and hands it back to you for free. Some of these are going to sound wrong. Good. That means you've never actually been taught how to cook a steak, only how everybody else cooks one badly and calls it normal. A lifetime behind a wood stove, and 30 years of my grandmother correcting me is my whole credential here. Nothing to buy at the end of this. Stay with me, because the very first mistake I'm about to show you is the reason almost every home steak in America comes out wrong. Before number 1, if you want the rest of this series on old mountain cooking, scan the QR code on your screen right now and subscribe. I've got a lot more of this coming. Number 1, cook it backwards. The order almost everybody uses is upside down. The normal way is a cold piece of beef thrown over a screaming hot fire, flipping while the outside chars and the inside creeps unevenly toward done. By the time the center's right, there's a thick gray band of overcooked meat under the crust. You're judging doneness by poking it, hoping. Some nights you get lucky. Most nights you don't. In the mountains, nobody cooked meat that way, because nobody had a grill, and wasting a piece of an animal you raised and fed for a year yourself wasn't something anybody could afford to do carelessly. The fire was one part at the very end. Everything before that happened low and slow, near the heat, never over the hottest part of it. Turn the whole process around. Gentle heat first, for the better part of an hour. The violent sear comes last and lasts under 2 minutes total. In an oven, 250 degrees on a wire rack. On a smoker, 225. On a kettle grill, bank every coal to one side and put the meat on the empty side with the lid down. On gas, light one burner and park the steak as far from it as the grate allows. While it sits in that gentle heat, the center and the edges end up almost identical, top to bottom. That gray band never forms because nothing ever got blasted. It doesn't look impressive at this stage. It looks like a piece of meat sitting quietly in a warm box. That's exactly right. Everything that matters is happening where you can't see it. Every method after this one depends on getting this one right. Miss this, and nothing else on the list saves you. Number 2, 115. Write that number down. The moment you start cooking low and slow, you lose the ability to judge doneness by feel. So you use a thermometer, and you pull the steak the instant it reads 115 degrees in the thickest part. Not 125. Not close enough. Why 115? Because the sear is still coming, and it's violent. It'll push the center up another 15 degrees and land you around 130. A perfect medium rare. Want medium? Pull it at 120. The sear always adds its 15. An instant read thermometer costs less than the steak itself. It's the one tool on this whole list I'll tell you to go buy. My grandmother never had one. She went by sound and touch and 40 years on the same wood stove. That instinct isn't something you can shortcut, but a thermometer gets you there in one trip to the store. I've watched grown men with decades of grilling behind them argue about doneness by feel and be dead wrong. The thermometer is never wrong. Keep that in your head. It matters again later. Number 3, salt it the night before, uncovered, on a rack. This is the step almost everybody refuses to believe matters until they taste it. Once, and then they never go back. Coarse salt, 3/4 teaspoon per pound, every surface covered, then into the fridge on a wire rack, uncovered, overnight. Here's what happens while you sleep. First 10 minutes, the salt pulls moisture out of the meat, which looks like the opposite of what you want. That's why the myth about salting late refuses to die. Give it 30 or 40 minutes, though, and that moisture dissolves the salt into a brine, and the brine gets pulled back in, seasoning the meat from the inside instead of sitting on top like sand on a beach. Meanwhile, the cold, dry fridge air is drying the surface all night. A wet steak cannot form a crust. It just steams, and you get that patchy grey exterior. Where I grew up, this had no name. It was just what you did the night before Sunday dinner. Cost you a rack and 8 hours of doing nothing, which might be the cheapest ingredient on this whole list. Number 4, never let it come to room temperature. Every recipe on earth tells you to pull the steak out an hour before cooking. It's close to useless. Meat is a poor conductor, and an hour on the counter moves the center a couple of degrees at most. What that hour actually does is undo the surface drying you just spent all night achieving. And here's the real reason it matters. The gap between a cold center and a screaming hot surface is your friend. That gap is the room you have to build a crust in before the middle catches up. Warm the middle ahead of time, and you've narrowed your own window with your own hands. Straight from cold to fire, every time. Number 5, the freezer trick. For the night you forgot to plan ahead. Pat the steak dry, salt it, set it on a wire rack, and freeze it 30 to 45 minutes, not longer than an hour. Your freezer is the driest air in your house, and in under an hour it pulls surface moisture off a steak faster than a whole night in the fridge. Because the time is short, the inside never freezes or toughens. The surface goes slightly tacky. That's your sign. That tackiness is a crust waiting to happen. You can even cook a steak straight from frozen, and it works better than it has any right to, especially cooking backwards. A frozen center just widens that gap even more. It means a steak in the freezer is never an emergency. It's just dinner. Number 6, thick or don't bother. 1.5 inches minimum. 2 inches is better. A thin steak cannot be cooked well by anybody, anywhere. There's no room for a gentle interior and an aggressive crust at the same time. My grandmother never cut a steak thin in her life. When you raise the animal yourself, you don't slice thin to stretch it further. You cut it thick, cook it as one piece, and carve it at the table so everybody shares. Same amount of meat, a completely different meal. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the next several steps are the ones that actually build the crust. And this is the part almost everybody rushes. Number 7, 2 zones, never one fire. Bank every coal to one side of the kettle, leave the other half empty. On gas, light one burner, and leave the rest off. That's the whole setup, and it costs nothing. The steak lives on the cool side with the lid down for the entire slow phase, and only visits the hot side at the very end for under 2 minutes. With the lid down and coals banked, a kettle grill is basically an oven. The convection running around that dome is remarkably even, as long as you leave the vents mostly closed and leave the lid alone. Every time you lift the lid to peak, you dump the heat and spike the fire. Lifting the lid isn't checking on your steak. It's changing your steak. You want the fire to look like almost nothing for 45 minutes, then look like a forge for 90 seconds. Number 8, 1 chunk of hardwood. And this is the one thing no restaurant broiler on earth can answer. A commercial broiler is hotter than anything you'll ever own, I'll admit that plainly. But a broiler cannot make smoke. Neither can a pan or an oven. So use the one weapon no professional kitchen can copy. 1 or 2 fist-sized chunks of real hardwood, dry, straight onto the coals at the start of the slow phase. Oak if you can find it, hickory if you want it stronger. That's what we burned back home, because that's what grew on the ridge behind the house. For the whole 45 minutes, thin blue smoke settles into the beef, not a barbecue. Amount, Just enough that the flavor under the crust is something the person eating it has never had on a plate they paid for. Watch the color. Thin and blue is right. Thick and white means the wood is smoldering and will turn the steak bitter. Crack the vent a little wider and let it clear. Here's the part most people never even think to check, and it's the difference between a good crust and a great one. Number 9. Dry it with a towel at the last second. The steak comes off the low heat and sits while your pan heats up, and moisture always creeps back to the surface in that window. Right before it goes into the fat, press a paper towel firmly over every face. Both sides, both edges, the fat cap too. Takes 4 seconds. It's the difference between a crust that forms in 45 seconds and one that takes twice as long and never gets as dark, because every drop of surface water has to boil off before browning even starts. Number 10. Sear it in rendered beef fat you make yourself. Not olive oil, burns bitter before the pan's hot enough. Not butter, same problem, faster. Rendered beef fat, tallow. And you don't buy it. You make it from trim you'd otherwise throw away. Cut it small, heavy pot, lowest heat, a splash of water so it doesn't catch early, 2 or 3 hours, barely stirred, then strain into a jar. Keeps for months. Tallow holds heat, butter can't, doesn't turn bitter, and fills every hollow on the meat's surface so the crust forms everywhere instead of in patches, because you're searing beef in beef. And this next one is where most home cooks quietly sabotage everything they just did right. Number 11. Cast iron. Preheated far longer than you think. Not stainless, not non-stick. Cast iron doesn't collapse in temperature the second cold meat lands in it. A thin pan does, and then you're steaming instead of searing. 6 to 8 minutes on high, not 2. It'll look hot after 2 minutes, and it's lying to you. The metal hasn't equalized yet. You'll know it's ready when the tallow shimmers and just barely smokes. And here's the honest truth about restaurant equipment. Those commercial infrared broilers really do hit 1,600 degrees in under 2 minutes, and your kitchen will never match that. Stop trying. But heat past a certain point is speed, not quality. A properly heated cast iron pan does the same chemistry in 90 seconds that their equipment does in 40. Nobody has ever eaten a steak and told you how fast the crust formed. Number 12. 90 seconds total, basted with a spoon the whole time. 45 seconds aside. While it's in there, tilt the pan so the fat pools and spoon it over the steak continuously. You're cooking the top with hot fat while the bottom cooks against the metal, which nearly halves your total time in the pan. This is the only moment for garlic and herbs, a smashed clove, and a sprig dropped into the fat for the last 30 seconds. Any earlier, and it burns bitter. When the steak comes out, drop another smashed clove into the hot tallow, let it sit 30 seconds, and pour it over the sliced meat at the table. That's the whole sauce, and it beats anything served to me in a fancy little pot. Number 13. Stand it on its edge and render the fat cap. This is the step 9 out of 10 people skip, and it's the one that separates a good steak from one somebody remembers. Every ribeye has a band of fat along one edge. Cook the flat faces only, and it comes to the table white and unpleasant, and most people cut it off. That fat is the best flavor in the animal. After your 2 flat faces are done, stand the steak up on that fat edge with your tongs for 30 to 60 seconds until it goes golden and starts to bubble. What you get is a fat cap that eats like crackling instead of gristle. Number 14. Pepper after? Never before. Salt goes on the night before. Pepper doesn't go on until the steak is off the fire. Black pepper scorches well below sear temperature, and burnt pepper is bitter and dusty, not floral and sharp the way real pepper tastes. Grind it coarse and add it right after the sear while the surface is still hot and slick with fat. It sticks perfectly. and it actually tastes like pepper instead of ash. That's the whole build. 6 passes through fire and fat, and every one of them earns its place. Here's how you protect it once it's done. Number 15. Never press it, never fork it, never cut it open to look. All 3 cost you the exact thing you just spent an hour building. A spatula squeezes juice onto a hot surface, where it boils off instantly, cooling the pan. A fork puts holes in it, and juice leaves through every one. And cutting it open to check is the worst of the 3, because it feels responsible. But you have a thermometer, remember? Trust it. Tongs only. Always tongs. Number 16. The rest goes in the middle, not at the end. Every cooking show tells you to rest the meat after it comes off the fire. When people actually test that, the difference turns out much smaller than the confidence everybody repeats it with. Cooking backwards, the rest belongs somewhere else. The steak comes off the low heat at 115 and sits on the counter 5 or 10 minutes while your pan comes up to temperature. That pause dries the surface further and lets the interior settle, which is the actual job a rest is supposed to do. Then 90 seconds in the fat, and you can slice almost immediately. The steak reaches the table hot, crust still crackling. Ask yourself when you last had that at a restaurant. There's a pass, a heat lamp, a walk across the dining room, a plate losing heat in a window for 4 minutes before it reaches you. Yours sits for none of that. That might be the single biggest advantage on this entire list. Before I keep going, if any of this is landing, hit the QR code on screen and subscribe. There's still 4 steps left, and one of them is the one people write me about the most. Number 17. Throw the marinade away. A marinade does not reach the center of a steak. I've cut open marinated steaks and looked at the cross-section, and you can see exactly how far it got, a few millimeters after a full night soaking. What a marinade does is put water, sugar, and acid on the surface, the exact opposite of everything this method builds. On a thin, cheap cut cooked fast, fine. On a 2-inch steak, it's decoration and damage. Salt reaches the center because salt is a small ion, and it travels. That's the whole reason dry brining works and marinating doesn't. Number 18. Baking soda on the cheap cuts. This is where families like mine actually lived. Take a tough cut, chuck, flank, round, skirt, and toss it with 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda per pound. 15 to 20 minutes if thin, up to an hour if thicker. Rinse thoroughly and pat dry. Baking soda raises the pH at the surface, and the muscle proteins can't bond as tightly when heat hits them, so they stay loose instead of seizing up and wringing out their own moisture. This isn't internet folklore, it's the mechanism behind velveting, which Asian kitchens have used for centuries. Rinse it properly, or it tastes faintly of soap, and don't use it on a cut that's already tender. Number 19. Koji. 45 days of flavor in 2. This is the one thing on this list I didn't grow up with. I learned it much later, from a much younger man, and I've used it every month since. Koji is a mold used across the world for centuries to make miso, soy sauce, sake, and its enzymes break protein down. Grind the rice to a powder, rub it over the steak, wire rack, fridge, uncovered 48 hours, then rinse, pat dry, and cook it exactly as described. What comes out isn't identical to a 45-day dry-aged steak, and anybody who tells you it is selling something. But it's remarkably close. 2 days, not 4, or it tenderizes too far. Number 20. Read the grain before your knife touches it. Costs nothing, takes no equipment, rescues every cheap cut in the animal. A muscle is a bundle of long fibers running one direction. Cut along them and you hand somebody tough strings to chew. Cut across them and you've done most of the chewing with the knife. On the cheap cuts, shoulder, flank, skirt, sirloin, it's the entire difference between a good steak and a bad one. Those cuts aren't actually tough. They were sliced wrong, and nobody ever told the person holding the knife. That's all 20. Cook it backwards. Pull at 115. Salt the night before. Never room temperature. Freezer for the nights you didn't plan. Thick, always. 2 zones, 1 chunk of hardwood. Dry it with a towel at the last second. Sear in your own tallow. Cast iron, preheated properly. 90 seconds, basted. Stand it on its fat edge. Pepper after. No pressing, no forking, no cutting to look. Rest in the middle. Throw the marinade away. Baking soda for the tough cuts. Koji for 2 days. Read the grain before you cut. The first time I cooked a steak this way for a table full of people who'd only ever eaten off a grill, somebody asked me what butcher sold me the prime cut. It came off a shoulder that cost $6 a pound. He didn't believe me until I pulled the wrapper out of the trash and set it on the table. And that's the whole point underneath all of this. The cattle herd in this country is the smallest it's been since the early 1950s. Fewer animals, higher prices, no fast way out. Growing up on the mountain, we watched steak go from Sunday dinner to birthday dinner, and for a lot of families now, it's stopped being either one. Here's what almost nobody tells them. The ribeye, the strip, and the tenderloin together make up about 8% of the animal. That's what everybody's fighting over. You haven't been priced out of beef. You've been priced out of 8% of an animal, and told that 8% was the whole thing. Every method here works even better on the other 92. If any of this is going in the fridge tonight, scan the QR code and subscribe before you go. Next time, I'll show you how to dry age beef properly, right in the refrigerator you already own. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and which of these 20 you'd never heard before.